Ural Mountain Cave System Incident. On January 12, 2016, 3 experienced cave divers began an ambitious expedition to map underwater passages in a remote cave system in Russia's Ural Mountains. Dmitry Volkov was a 33-year-old geologist who specialized in cave diving for scientific research. Alexei Petrov, 29, worked as a mining engineer and brought technical expertise to the expedition. Ivan Kozlov, 41, served as the team's safety officer and rescue diver, with extensive experience in emergency procedures. The cave system lay 6 hours by snowmobile from the nearest town, accessible only during winter when frozen rivers created stable transportation routes. Air temperatures had dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius during the previous week, creating extreme conditions even by Siberian standards. The cave entrances were located beneath frozen lakes and rivers, with ice thickness reaching 3 feet in most areas. Some sections over moving water remained thinner and potentially unstable. The team had planned a 3-day expedition to explore and map previously uncharted underwater passages. Their equipment included specialized cold water gear, underwater mapping tools, and emergency supplies for the remote location. Communication with the outside world was limited, and GPS signals were unreliable in the mountainous terrain. On the first day, the expedition proceeded successfully. The team mapped several hundred meters of underwater passages and identified connections between multiple chambers. They established a base camp near the primary entrance and documented their discoveries with underwater photography. The cave system proved more extensive than expected, with passages leading deeper into the mountain. Overnight, temperatures dropped an additional 10 degrees, causing significant changes to the cave's ice formations. When the team prepared to exit the following morning, they discovered their primary exit route partially blocked by new ice formation. The overnight freeze had created additional barriers in the narrower passages, making their planned exit route impassable with their current equipment configuration. The team decided to attempt exit through an alternate passage they had explored the previous day. This route was less familiar but appeared navigable. Dmitry volunteered to lead the exit, followed by Alexei and then Ivan. The passage required swimming through a narrow restriction before opening into a larger chamber that connected to a known exit. As they entered the alternate passage, Dmitry became separated when he decided to explore a side passage that appeared to offer a more direct route. Cave diving protocol required the team to stay together, but the urgency of their exit situation and communication difficulties led to the separation. Alexei and Ivan continued toward the main exit, while Dmitry explored the alternate route alone. In the main passage, Alexei's dry suit suffered a catastrophic tear when sharp rock formations, made more brittle by the extreme cold, punctured the material. Cold water flooded his suit immediately, causing rapid heat loss and making buoyancy control extremely difficult. The flooded suit created additional drag and made swimming through tight passages much more challenging. Ivan faced an impossible decision. Dmitry had not rejoined them and was somewhere in the cave system alone, while Alexei required immediate assistance to survive the suit flooding and hypothermia. Their underwater communication system had failed in the extreme cold, making coordination impossible. Ivan chose to help Alexei reach the surface immediately, planning to return for Dmitry once Alexei was safe. The exit route they had planned to use had become completely blocked by ice formation during their time underwater. The overnight freeze had sealed passages that were open just hours earlier. Ivan and Alexei found themselves trapped in the cave system with no clear exit, limited air supplies, and Alexei suffering from severe hypothermia due to his flooded suit. Ivan managed to find a small air pocket in one of the chambers, allowing both divers to surface temporarily and share the remaining air from their tanks. Alexei's condition continued deteriorating due to heat loss, and his cognitive function was severely impaired. Ivan made the decision to attempt a solo exit through a narrow passage that might still be passable, leaving Alexei in the air pocket. After a desperate search, Ivan located an exit route that remained partially open. He returned to Alexei and managed to help him through the narrow opening to the surface. Both divers emerged after nearly 4 hours underwater, with Alexei unconscious from hypothermia. Ivan immediately began emergency treatment while calling for rescue assistance on their emergency beacon. Rescue teams arrived 18 hours later due to the extreme weather conditions and remote location. Alexei survived but suffered permanent circulation damage and frostbite injuries. Dmitry's body was located 3 weeks later in the side passage he had chosen to explore. His air supply had run out while he searched for an exit that did not exist. The incident highlighted how extreme isolation amplifies every risk in technical diving, turning survivable problems into fatal situations when no external support is available. Lake Huron Ice Dive Incident. On March 15, 2018, a group of divers gathered at a popular ice diving site near Tobermory on Lake Huron for advanced training. Michael Thompson was 31 years old with over 200 log dives, but limited ice diving experience. His dive buddy David Chen, 29, held an advanced open water certification and was equally new to ice diving. Sarah Mitchell, a 35-year-old ice diving instructor with years of cold water experience, supervised the training group from a local dive shop. The dive site featured 18 inches of solid ice considered safe for surface support operations. Water temperature held steady at 1 degree Celsius, with visibility ranging from 15 to 20 feet beneath the ice canopy. A minimal current moved through the area, barely noticeable at the surface, but present throughout the water column. The entry and exit hole had been cut with a chainsaw that morning, creating an 8-foot diameter opening. Safety protocols included rope tenders on the surface, emergency equipment positioned nearby, and established communication procedures. Sarah conducted a thorough briefing covering ice diving safety procedures, emphasizing the importance of maintaining contact with the entry hole and conservative air management. The group practiced hand signals and reviewed emergency procedures before entering the water. Michael and David received specific instructions about their planned route: descend to 40 feet, follow a rectangular pattern for 15 minutes, then return to the entry point with adequate air reserves. The dive began normally. Michael and David entered the water together, conducting final equipment checks at the surface before descending. The underwater environment was pristine, with the ice ceiling creating an ethereal blue glow above them. They descended to their planned depth and began following their intended route, maintaining visual contact with each other and occasionally checking their location relative to the entry hole above. At 30 minutes into the dive, the divers began their planned ascent. The minimal current that had seemed insignificant during descent had gradually pushed them off their intended course. Neither diver immediately noticed the subtle displacement, as the featureless ice ceiling provided few reference points for navigation. Their compass readings, affected by the cold and nearby metallic objects, showed inconsistent directions. Michael reached what he believed was the correct location for the entry hole, but found only solid ice above him. He swam in widening circles, searching for the familiar dark opening. David joined the search, both divers now consuming air at an accelerated rate due to increased activity and rising anxiety. The ice ceiling stretched endlessly in all directions, providing no landmarks or distinguishing features. As his air gauge moved into the red zone, Michael's controlled search became increasingly frantic. He swam rapidly in multiple directions, covering the same areas repeatedly without recognizing his error. The cold water was affecting his cognitive function, making logical navigation decisions more difficult. His breathing rate increased dramatically, further depleting his remaining air supply. David attempted to guide his buddy toward what he believed was the correct direction, but his own navigation had become compromised. Both divers were now searching desperately along the underside of the ice, their movements stirring up bottom sediment and further reducing visibility. The entry hole was actually only 50 feet away, but the current had displaced them just enough to put it outside their search pattern. With his air supply approaching empty, Michael made the decision to attempt an emergency ascent. He inflated his buoyancy vest and rose rapidly toward the ice ceiling. The solid ice stopped his ascent completely, trapping him against the frozen surface. He pounded on the ice with his fists, but the 18 inches of solid ice would not break. His regulator began delivering less air as his tank approached empty. David, realizing his buddy was in final crisis, attempted to share his remaining air. The buddy breathing procedure, difficult under normal conditions, became nearly impossible in the cold water with two panicked divers. Michael's movements became weaker as his air ran out completely. He lost consciousness while still trapped against the underside of the ice. The surface support team realized the divers were overdue and immediately initiated emergency procedures. Sarah Mitchell and another instructor entered the water with emergency air supplies. They found David floating weakly near the ice ceiling, hypothermic but conscious. Michael was located 50 feet from the entry hole, unconscious and unresponsive. The rescue team brought both divers to the surface immediately. David was treated for severe hypothermia but recovered fully. Despite immediate CPR attempts and rapid transport to medical facilities, Michael could not be revived. The investigation revealed how even minimal current could cause fatal disorientation in ice diving, and emphasized the critical importance of tether lines connecting divers to their entry point. Finland ice diving accidents. Between 2010 and 2019, Finland's frozen lake systems became the site of multiple ice diving incidents that revealed how extreme cold creates cascading equipment failures. The first incident occurred in February 2012 when Antti Virtanen, a 42-year-old experienced technical diver, entered Lake Saimaa for routine ice diving training. Antti had completed over 800 cold water dives and regularly taught winter diving courses. The air temperature that morning was minus 20 degrees Celsius, with water temperatures measuring 2 degrees Celsius beneath 16 inches of solid ice. Antti descended to 60 feet following a standard training profile. His equipment functioned normally during the initial descent, but as he reached his maximum planned depth, his primary regulator began free-flowing. The extreme cold had caused internal components to freeze, releasing air in an uncontrolled stream. Antti switched to his backup regulator and began managing his air consumption, but the cold had affected more than just his primary air source. His dry suit seal, stressed by the temperature differential and his movements while managing the regulator problem, developed a small tear near the neck. Cold water began entering the suit, immediately affecting his core body temperature. In water just above freezing, even small amounts of flooding create rapid heat loss. Anti's fine motor skills began deteriorating within minutes as hypothermia set in. The combination of equipment problems demanded constant attention, but Anti's cognitive function was declining due to the cold. His navigation back to the entry hole, normally routine, became confused and indirect. He swam in wider patterns, using additional air while his body fought heat loss. When surface support realized he was overdue, they found him unconscious beneath the ice, 30 feet from the entry hole. He was successfully revived, but suffered permanent nerve damage from severe hypothermia. The second incident occurred in March 2015, when Eric Sandstrom, a 38-year-old diving instructor, became disoriented during what should have been a simple training dive in Lake Payan. Eric was conducting a certification dive for 2 students when his compass began giving erratic readings. The extreme cold had affected the instrument's accuracy, and metallic debris on the lake bottom further compromised navigation. Eric's planned 25-minute dive extended to 45 minutes as he searched for the entry hole. His air consumption increased dramatically as anxiety set in. The safety diver accompanying the group also became confused by the faulty compass readings, and both instructors found themselves low on air with no clear direction to the surface opening. The students, following proper procedure, had already surfaced when their air reached reserve levels. Surface support noticed bubbles moving away from the entry hole and immediately deployed emergency divers. Eric and the safety diver were found searching along the ice ceiling 80 feet from the correct location. Both were rescued successfully, but required treatment for hypothermia and near drowning. Eric's breathing gas ran completely empty during the rescue ascent. The most serious incident occurred in January 2018, when Mikko Lane, a 45-year-old cave diving specialist, entered an underwater cave system through an ice hole in Lake Ulujärvi. Mikko had planned a 40-minute exploration dive to map previously unexplored passages. The cave entrance, normally marked by natural landmarks, was obscured by ice formations and snow. During his exploration, current within the cave system stirred up sediment, reducing visibility to near zero. Mikko lost contact with his guideline in the murky water and became disoriented within the cave passages. While he searched for the line, ice conditions at the surface changed. The partially frozen entrance hole, weakened by his entry, froze over more completely, creating a much smaller opening. When Mikko finally relocated his guideline and followed it back to the entrance, he found the exit significantly reduced in size. His equipment configuration, suitable for the original opening, would not fit through the smaller hole. He attempted to remove gear underwater to reduce his profile, but the extreme cold made precise movements nearly impossible. Mikko's air supply ran critically low while he struggled with the blocked exit. He attempted to signal surface support by pounding on the ice, but the thick frozen surface muffled any sound. Surface support realized he was overdue and began cutting through the ice to enlarge the opening. They found him unconscious just beneath the entrance, his air supply completely exhausted. Emergency responders successfully revived Mikko, but he had suffered significant brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He required months of rehabilitation and never fully recovered his cognitive function. The incident led to new safety protocols requiring surface support teams to maintain entry holes with heating equipment and to establish backup exits for cave diving operations under ice. Boesmansgat Cave incident. On October 17, 1994, Dion Dreyer prepared for what he hoped would be a world record dive. Dion was 20 years old and had been technical diving for 3 years. He lived in Johannesburg and worked part-time at a dive shop while studying engineering. His friends knew him as fearless, sometimes recklessly so. Boesmansgat was a massive underwater sinkhole in South Africa's northern Cape Province, about 550 kilometers from Johannesburg. The name meant Bushman's Hole in Afrikaans. Local legends claimed the hole was bottomless, but surveys showed it dropped to at least 270 meters. The water was crystal clear for the first 100 meters, then disappeared into absolute blackness. Dion arrived at the remote site with his dive buddy and surface support team. The sinkhole measured about 100 meters across at the surface, with steep limestone walls plunging straight down. The water temperature was a constant 20 degrees Celsius. Dion's goal was to reach 250 meters, which would break the existing South African depth record. He wore a dry suit and carried multiple tanks of mixed breathing gas. At extreme depths, regular compressed air becomes toxic. His equipment included trimix tanks containing helium, oxygen, and nitrogen in carefully calculated proportion. The dive plan called for a 12-minute descent to 250 meters, followed by a lengthy decompression ascent lasting nearly 2 hours. Dion would stop at predetermined depths on the way up, allowing his body to safely eliminate absorbed nitrogen. Skipping decompression stops at these depths meant certain death from decompression sickness. His dive computer and depth gauges were checked multiple times. The support team verified his gas mixtures and reviewed emergency procedures. At 9:30 a.m., Dion entered the water and began his descent. The first 50 meters passed normally as he dropped through the clear upper layer. At 100 meters, he switched to his deeper breathing mix and continued down. The limestone walls became smoother as he descended, carved by thousands of years of underground water flow. His lights illuminated the rock face, but below him stretched only darkness. At 200 meters, Dion was deeper than most recreational divers would ever go. The water pressure was crushing, over 20 times greater than at the surface. Something went wrong at 272 meters. Whether it was nitrogen narcosis, equipment failure, or simply human error, no one would ever know for certain. Dion's dive buddy waited at 100 meters for his planned descent time. When Dion failed to appear, the buddy descended to search, but couldn't find him in the depths. The surface team waited anxiously as hours passed. Eventually, they realized the terrible truth. Dion Dreyer had died somewhere in the black depths of Boesmansgat. His body had sunk to the cave floor, far beyond the reach of any normal rescue attempt. The extreme depth, combined with the need for specialized mixed gas diving equipment, made immediate recovery impossible. Local authorities declared it too dangerous to attempt. For 11 years, Dion's body lay alone in the darkness at the bottom of Bushman's Hole. Plura Cave incident. On February 6, 2014, Patrick Grunqvist and Jerry Hutarinen traveled from Finland to explore Norway's Plura Cave system. Patrick was 41 years old and worked as a firefighter in Helsinki. His diving experience spanned over 15 years, with hundreds of cave dives throughout Scandinavia. Hari was 37, a construction engineer who had been cave diving for a decade. Both men were members of Finland's elite cave diving community and had explored some of Europe's most challenging underwater cave systems. They planned a routine exploration dive in Plura, a cave system known for its complex underwater passages connecting Norway and Sweden. The Plura Cave stretched for over 3 kilometers underground, with water-filled passages reaching depths of 130 meters. The cave system was formed by glacial meltwater carving through limestone over thousands of years. Most passages were narrow, barely wide enough for a single diver. The water temperature hovered near freezing at 4 degrees Celsius year-round. Visibility could drop to zero instantly when silt was disturbed from the cave floor. Strong underwater currents flowed through certain passages, capable of pushing divers off course or preventing them from swimming against the flow. Patrick and Shari entered the cave system through the Norwegian entrance, wearing dry suits and carrying multiple tanks of breathing gas. Their dive plan called for exploring a newly mapped section approximately 400 meters from the entrance. They carried underwater scooters to help navigate the strong currents and extend their range. Both divers used closed-circuit rebreathers that recycled their exhaled gas, allowing for longer bottom times in the cold water. Safety protocols required continuous guideline contact to prevent getting lost in the labyrinthine passages. The initial phase of their dive proceeded normally. They followed established guidelines through familiar passages, their lights cutting through the crystal clear water. At 80 meters depth, they reached the planned exploration area where new passages had been recently discovered. The passage narrowed to less than 2 meters wide, with a rocky ceiling that forced them to swim in single file. Their underwater scooters helped them maintain position against the moderate current flowing through this section. Somewhere in the new passage, both divers encountered fatal problems. Investigation later suggested equipment failures combined with navigation errors in near-zero visibility. Patrick's rebreather may have malfunctioned, flooding his breathing loop with water. Shari likely became disoriented trying to assist his dive partner in the narrow confines of the passage. When silt was disturbed, visibility dropped to absolute zero. In the chaos, both divers lost contact with their safety guidelines. Without visual or tactile reference to the exit route, they became trapped in the remote section of the cave system. The Finnish diving community received the devastating news 3 days later, when the bodies were discovered by Norwegian cave divers. Patrick and Jari had died approximately 600 meters from the cave entrance, in a section requiring advanced technical diving skills to reach. The location was beyond the limits of most rescue divers. Norwegian authorities initially declared the bodies unrecoverable due to the extreme technical challenges and risk to additional divers. However, the tight-knit Scandinavian cave diving community felt differently. These men had families waiting for closure. Volunteers from Norway's most experienced cave diving teams began organizing an unprecedented recovery mission. They understood the dangers intimately, but believed every diver deserved to come home. The recovery would require multiple dangerous dives into the same conditions that had killed Patrick and Shari. Each volunteer knew they might not survive the attempt. Devil's Throat Cave Incident. On July 15, 1970, Georgi Dimitrov and Stefan Petrov descended into Bulgaria's Devil's Throat Cave and vanished without a trace. Georgi was 29 years old, an experienced diver from Sofia who worked as a marine biologist. Stefan was 32, a professional photographer documenting Bulgaria's underwater cave systems. Both men were members of the Bulgarian Underwater Federation and had explored dozens of caves throughout the Balkans. Devil's Throat Cave, located in the Rhodope Mountains near the Greek border, was known locally as Diavolsko Garlo, below. Legend claimed it was a gateway to the underworld, where the mythical musician Orpheus had descended to rescue his wife Eurydice. The cave system dropped vertically into the earth through a narrow opening barely 3 meters wide. Underground rivers had carved a complex network of passages through the limestone, creating multiple levels and chambers. The main passage descended nearly 100 meters before branching into smaller tunnels. What made Devil's Throat particularly treacherous was its unique water flow pattern. Underground streams entered the cave from multiple directions, creating powerful currents and unpredictable water levels. During heavy rains, the cave could flood completely within hours. Georgi and Stefan entered the cave at 10 a.m., carrying basic diving equipment available in 1970s Eastern Europe. Their gear included single compressed air tanks, simple depth gauges, and waterproof flashlights. Modern technical diving equipment like mixed gas systems and dive computers wouldn't be widely available for another decade. They planned to explore the main chamber and document previously unmapped passages for the Bulgarian Geological Survey. Their surface support team expected them to return within 3 hours. By evening, it became clear that both divers were missing. The surface team could hear no responses to their calls echoing down the cave entrance. Local authorities organized the first search effort using volunteer divers from nearby towns. The searchers discovered the men's backup equipment staged near the cave entrance, but found no trace of the divers themselves. The cave's complex layout and strong currents made systematic searching nearly impossible with 1970s technology. Over the following months, Bulgarian diving teams made repeated attempts to locate the missing men. Each recovery effort revealed new dangers within the cave system. Divers reported being swept off course by powerful currents flowing through narrow passages. Several searchers experienced equipment failures and near-drowning incidents. The cave seemed designed to trap anyone who ventured too deep into its passages. Underwater visibility was often reduced to zero when currents stirred up sediment from the cave floor. International diving teams arrived in 1971 to assist the search efforts. French cave diving specialists brought more advanced equipment and underwater mapping techniques. However, even experienced international divers found Devil's Throat extremely hazardous. The cave's unique geology created underwater passages that led to dead ends or areas with no breathable air pockets. Several foreign divers required emergency rescue after becoming disoriented in the complex passage network. By 1975, over a dozen serious recovery attempts had been made by divers from 6 different countries. Each expedition resulted in equipment losses, injuries, or near fatalities. The cave earned a reputation among European divers as a death trap that claimed not only its original victims, but threatened anyone who entered seeking to recover them. Bulgarian authorities eventually restricted access to the cave after 2 Romanian divers nearly died in a 1978 recovery attempt. The bodies of Georgi Dimitrov and Stefan Petrov were never recovered. Devil's Throat Cave became a cautionary tale in the international diving community about locations so inherently dangerous that recovery attempts only added to the casualty count. The cave remained sealed for decades, a limestone tomb containing secrets that proved too deadly to retrieve. Dave Shaw's recovery attempt. On January 8, 2005, David Shaw descended into Boesmansgat with a mission that had haunted the South African diving community for over a decade. Shaw was 50 years old, an Australian airline pilot living in Hong Kong. Unlike the impulsive young Dion Dreyer, Shaw was methodical and experienced. He had logged over 8,000 dives and held multiple deep diving records. Shaw had learned about Dion's body during a previous dive to Boesmansgat in 2004. At 270 meters, his lights had illuminated a human skull and scattered bones on the silt-covered cave floor. The sight disturbed him profoundly. Shaw spent months planning the recovery operation. He assembled a team of technical divers led by Don Shirley, one of South Africa's most experienced deep diving instructors. The logistical challenges were immense. At 272 meters depth, Shaw would have only a few minutes of bottom time before his breathing gas supplies demanded ascent. The water pressure was nearly 28 times greater than at sea level. Any mistake with gas mixtures or decompression schedules would be fatal. Shaw's equipment included a specialized rebreather that recycled his exhaled gas, extending his underwater time. He carried multiple backup systems and emergency gas supplies. Most unusually, Shaw mounted an underwater video camera to document the recovery. He wanted proof for Dion's family that their son's body had been found and treated with respect. The camera would also provide evidence if something went wrong. The dive plan called for Shaw to descend alone to the body, while support divers waited at various depths. At 270 meters, he would have approximately 8 minutes to secure Dion's remains in a body bag and begin his ascent. The decompression stops would take over 12 hours, requiring precise gas management and unwavering discipline. Shaw's dive computer calculated over 20 mandatory decompression stops during the ascent. Shaw entered the water at 6:54 a.m. His descent through the clear upper waters was flawless. At each planned depth, he switched breathing gas mixtures meters according to his calculations. The support team monitored his progress through underwater communication systems. At 200 meters, Shaw was already deeper than most technical divers would ever venture. He continued into the black depths where sunlight had never reached. At 272 meters, Shaw found what remained of Dion Dreyer. 11 years underwater had reduced the body to bones and diving equipment scattered across the silt floor. Shaw began the delicate process of collecting the remains. The body bag proved more difficult to manage than anticipated in the confined space. The bones were tangled with diving gear and partially buried in silt. Each movement stirred up clouds of sediment that reduced visibility to zero. Shaw's underwater camera recorded everything as he worked frantically against time and gas supplies. The remains were more extensive than expected, scattered across a wider area. Shaw struggled to gather everything into the body bag while monitoring his breathing gas and decompression obligations. His bottom time exceeded the planned limit as complications mounted. During the ascent, disaster struck. Shaw became entangled in the body bag's straps or lines. His camera recorded his increasingly desperate attempts to free himself, while his breathing gas ran low. The extreme depth made every movement exhausting. Shaw's rebreather malfunctioned, or he made a critical error in gas management. At some point during the long ascent, David Shaw died attempting to bring Dion Dreyer home. Both bodies sank back into the depths of Boesmansgat, leaving two families to mourn and a diving community to question whether some recoveries are simply too dangerous to attempt. Cenote dos Ojos incident. On July 8, 2021, Carlos Mendoza led an advanced cave diving expedition into Mexico's Cenote dos Ojos system. Carlos was 31 years old and had been teaching cave diving for 12 years. His clients were experienced divers, Janet Morrison, a 38-year-old underwater photographer specializing in cenote systems, and Tom Bradley, a 42-year-old technical diver from Texas. Cenote dos Ojos, meaning two eyes, was one of the world's longest underwater cave systems, with over 80 kilometers of surveyed passages. The cenote featured two separate entrances connected by a complex network of tunnels and caverns. Underground rivers flowed through limestone corridors carved over millions of years. The water temperature remained constant at 25 degrees Celsius year-round. Carlos had guided over 800 cave dives without a serious incident. The team met at 8 a.m. for equipment preparation and dive planning. They would enter through the north eye, penetrate 200 meters into the main tunnel, explore the halocline where fresh water meets salt water, then return via the same route. Maximum depth would be 18 meters with a planned bottom time of 45 minutes. Each diver carried twin 12-liter tanks, primary and backup lights, and emergency signaling devices. Carlos attached the main guideline at the cavern zone entrance, the point where natural light disappeared. The team descended into crystal clear water, with visibility exceeding 100 meters. Limestone formations created cathedral-like chambers decorated with stalactites and flowstone. At 15 meters depth, they passed through the halocline, a distinct layer where fresh groundwater mixed with saltwater intrusion from the ocean. The density difference created a mirror-like effect that distorted vision. Janet began photographing the unique geological formations. Her powerful strobes illuminated hidden chambers and revealed intricate details in the rock. Tom maintained position as safety diver, monitoring air supplies and navigation. At 150 meters penetration, Carlos noticed unusual movement in a side passage. A large green moray eel, approximately 5 feet long, emerged from a crevice between limestone blocks. Moray eels were common in cenotes connected to the ocean, but this specimen was exceptionally large. The eel's behavior seemed agitated. It opened and closed its mouth repeatedly, displaying rows of sharp teeth. Carlos signaled for the team to maintain distance and continue along the main guideline. As they swam past the side passage, two more eels appeared. The largest one, nearly 6 feet long with a massive head, positioned itself directly in their path. Janet, focused on photographing the limestone formations, didn't notice the eel until it was 2 meters away. The eel's defensive posture escalated quickly. It coiled its muscular body and opened its mouth wide, revealing a bright yellow interior lined with needle-sharp teeth. Carlos recognized breeding season territorial behavior. The eels were defending their nesting area against perceived intruders. He signaled for an immediate retreat, but the narrow passage limited their maneuvering options. Janet's camera housing caught on a limestone protrusion as she tried to back away. The housing's lanyard wrapped around a rock formation, temporarily trapping her. Tom moved to assist, but his movement triggered the largest eel's attack response. The eel lunged forward with surprising speed, its jaws clamping down on Tom's right forearm, just above his diving glove. The bite penetrated the 5mm neoprene suit and drew blood immediately. Tom's regulator fell from his mouth as he instinctively pulled away. Carlos quickly inserted his backup regulator into Tom's mouth, while simultaneously obviously signaling for emergency ascent. The eel released its grip but remained aggressively positioned. Blood in the water attracted the attention of the other eels, which began moving toward the group. Janet freed herself from the limestone snag and activated her emergency signaling device. The three divers began a controlled emergency exit, following the guideline while Tom's arm continued bleeding. At 100 meters from the entrance, they encountered a fourth eel blocking their path. Carlos used his dive light to create bright flashes, temporarily disorienting the eel enough for the group to pass. They reached the cavern zone and ascended to 5 meters for a safety stop. Tom's bite wound required immediate medical attention. At the surface, Carlos administered first aid and called for emergency medical transport. Tom received 12 stitches at the local clinic and antibiotic treatment to prevent infection from the eel's bacteria-laden mouth. Janet's photographs captured the moment before the attack, showing the eel's impressive size and aggressive posture. The incident report noted that breeding season made normally docile eels extremely territorial and dangerous to cave divers. Florida Springs Incident. On September 22, 2020, Rick Patterson organized a cave diving trip to Ginnie Springs in northern Florida. Rick was 45 years old and owned a local dive shop. He had been diving Florida's spring systems for 20 years. His group included Michelle Santos, a 29-year-old cave diving instructor, Alex Thompson, a 33-year-old recreational diver visiting from Michigan, and Lisa Chang, a 24-year-old marine biology student from the University of Florida. Ginnie Springs was famous for its crystal clear water and extensive cave system. The main spring produced 72 million gallons of water daily at a constant temperature of 22 degrees Celsius. The spring entrance opened into a large basin before narrowing into underwater passages that extended for miles through the limestone aquifer. September marked the beginning of alligator breeding season in Florida, when territorial males became increasingly aggressive. Local wildlife officials had posted warnings about unusual alligator activity near several spring systems. Rick had noticed the signs, but assumed they referred to surface encounters, not diving activities. The group arrived at 9 a.m. and began equipment preparation near the wooden dock. The water appeared unusually murky compared to Ginnie's typical gin-clear conditions. Tannins from recent rainfall had reduced visibility to about 15 meters instead of the normal 50 meters. Rick briefed the group on the cave system layout and emergency procedures. They would enter the main spring, descend to the cave mouth at 8 meters depth, and explore the first chamber for 30 minutes before returning. Alex had limited cave diving experience, so they planned a conservative penetration distance of 75 meters. Lisa carried underwater research equipment to collect water samples for her thesis on spring ecosystem health. As they entered the water, Rick noticed unusual ripples near the spring's edge where cypress trees created overhead cover. Something large had recently disturbed the water surface. Michelle spotted fresh gouges in the sandy bottom near the cave entrance, claw marks nearly 15 centimeters long. She pointed them out to Rick, who recognized them as alligator tracks. The scratches were recent, made within the last few hours. Despite this evidence, Rick decided to proceed with the dive. Florida springs typically remain too cold for alligators to spend extended time underwater. The group descended along the limestone walls toward the cave entrance. At 6 meters depth, the water temperature dropped noticeably. Lisa activated her sampling equipment and began taking measurements. Alex followed closely behind Rick, maintaining visual contact in the reduced visibility. As they approached the cave mouth, Michelle's dive light illuminated something unexpected. Two large eyes reflected the light from inside the cave entrance. The alligator was massive, easily 11 feet long with a head the size of a small boat motor. The reptile had positioned itself directly inside the cave mouth, blocking the entrance passage. Its powerful tail extended into the darkness behind it. Rick immediately signaled for the group to stop and back away slowly. Alligators typically avoided divers, but this individual showed no signs of retreating. Instead, it maintained its position and began displaying aggressive behavior. The gator's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of conical teeth designed for crushing. Its body language indicated territorial defense rather than predator-prey behavior. This was a breeding male defending his chosen territory. Alex, unfamiliar with alligator behavior, continued swimming forward despite Rick's signals. The movement triggered the alligator's attack response. With explosive speed, the gator lunged from the cave entrance directly toward Alex. The reptile's jaws opened wide, revealing a pink mouth interior lined with 80 sharp teeth. Rick pushed Alex aside just as the alligator's jaws snapped shut where his torso had been moments earlier. The impact knocked Alex's regulator from his mouth and sent his mask flying. Michelle immediately moved to assist, inserting her backup regulator into Alex's mouth while he struggled to replace his mask. The alligator, having missed its target, began circling the group with increasing agitation. Its movements created powerful underwater currents that stirred up sediment from the bottom. Visibility dropped to less than 5 meters, making it impossible to track the predator's position. Rick activated his emergency whistle to alert surface support. The sound seemed to further agitate the alligator, which began tail slapping to assert dominance over its territory. Lisa, still focused on her research equipment, didn't realize the danger until Michelle grabbed her arm and pointed toward 2 more sets of eyes emerging from the shadows. 3 alligators now surrounded the dive group in the confined spring basin. The largest male continued its aggressive displays while the smaller individuals maintained defensive positions near the cave system. Rick made the decision for an emergency surface evacuation. The group began a rapid ascent, but the dominant male followed them upward. At 3 meters depth, the alligator made a second attack attempt, this time targeting Michelle's fins. Its jaws clamped down on her right fin, the impact transmitted through her leg. She kicked frantically with her left leg while Rick struck the alligator's snout with his dive light. The reptile released its grip and sank back toward the bottom. The group surfaced immediately and swam quickly to the dock. Alex suffered minor cuts from lost equipment, and Michelle's fin showed puncture marks from the alligator's teeth. Local wildlife officers arrived within 20 minutes and confirmed that 3 large males had claimed territory in the spring system during breeding season. The cave entrance remained closed to divers for 6 weeks until the alligators moved to deeper water. Blue Hole Incident. On March 15, 2019, Mike Rodriguez prepared for what seemed like a routine dive at Belize's Great Blue Hole. Mike was 34 years old and had worked as a dive master for 8 years. He guided 3 tourists that morning. The Great Blue Hole stretched 300 meters across and plunged 125 meters into the Caribbean Sea. Ancient limestone formations created a circular sinkhole that attracted divers from around the world. The group departed from Ambergris Cay at 7:30 a.m. aboard a 28-foot dive boat. Weather conditions were ideal with 2-foot swells and unlimited surface visibility. Mike briefed the group about the dive plan. They would descend to 40 meters along the rim, explore the limestone stalactites for 25 minutes, then ascend slowly with a safety stop at 5 meters. He mentioned the typical marine life, reef sharks, groupers, and angelfish. What he didn't mention was the unusual shark behavior reported by other dive operators that week. The team entered the water at 9:15 a.m. Surface visibility was excellent at 30 meters. They descended along the vertical wall, passing through layers of different colored water. At 15 meters, the water changed from light blue to deep indigo. Sarah checked her depth gauge and air supply. Her tank showed 180 bar of pressure. David adjusted his underwater camera housing and tested the strobe lights. The flashes illuminated the limestone formations in brilliant white bursts. At 25 meters, they encountered the first marine life. A large Nassau grouper, nearly 4 feet long, observed them from a crevice in the wall. Emma pointed excitedly at the fish, her first encounter with such a large specimen. As they continued descending, the walls became more dramatic. Ancient stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone daggers, formed when the cave was above sea level thousands of years ago. At 35 meters, Mike noticed movement in the blue water beyond the wall. 3 Caribbean reef sharks swam in lazy circles about 20 meters away. Each shark was approximately 6 feet long, with the characteristic blunt snout and bronze coloring. Mike signaled to the group and pointed toward the sharks. This was exactly what they had hoped to see. David immediately began photographing, his camera strobes firing repeatedly. The bright flashes seemed to catch the sharks' attention. Instead of maintaining their distance, they began swimming closer. Within minutes, 2 more sharks appeared from the deeper water, then 3 more. The sharks' behavior was different from Mike's previous encounters. Instead of showing mild curiosity before swimming away, they circled tighter and moved with more aggressive body language. Their pectoral fins were lowered and their swimming pattern became more erratic. Sarah noticed the change first. As a marine biologist, she recognized territorial behavior. She tapped her tank with her dive knife to get Mike's attention. Mike looked at his dive computer. They had been at depth for 18 minutes and were consuming air faster than planned due to the excitement. Emma's breathing had accelerated and her tank pressure was dropping quickly. The largest shark, nearly 8 feet long, approached within 5 meters. Its movements were no longer casual. David continued taking photos, unaware that his strobes might be triggering the aggressive response. Mike made the decision to abort the dive. He signaled for an immediate ascent. The group began swimming upward along the wall, but the sharks followed. At 25 meters, the largest shark made a close pass directly in front of Sarah. She pressed herself against the limestone wall, her heart rate spiking. Mike grabbed David's camera and switched off the strobe function. Without the bright flashes, the shark's behavior began to calm slightly. The group continued their ascent, maintaining visual contact with the sharks, until they reached 15 meters. At the safety stop, Mike counted 7 sharks circling below them in the blue water. After 3 minutes, they surfaced safely. Back on the boat, Sarah explained that the sharks had likely been feeding in the area and viewed the dive lights as competition or threat stimuli. The group had encountered the most aggressive reef shark behavior Mike had seen in his 8 years of guiding. Emma decided to skip the afternoon dive. Bahamas Blue Holes Incident. On November 14, 2022, Dr. Amanda Foster led a deep diving research expedition to Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. Amanda was 41 years old and specialized in technical diving for marine research. She held certifications in mixed gas diving and had explored blue holes throughout the Caribbean. Her support team included James Mitchell, a 39-year-old dive safety officer, and Roberto Silva, a 36-year-old local guide who knew the blue hole's unique characteristics. Dean's Blue Hole was the world's deepest known saltwater blue hole, plunging 202 meters into the seafloor near Long Island. The circular opening measured 25 meters across at the surface before expanding into a massive underwater cavern. At 20 meters depth, the hole opened into a cathedral-like chamber over 100 meters wide. Ancient limestone formations created dramatic overhangs and swim-through passages. The site was famous among technical divers for its depth and pristine conditions. Recent reports from local fishermen mentioned unusual shark activity near the blue hole. Large hammerheads had been spotted in groups, behavior typically associated with seasonal migrations. Amanda's research focused on deep-water marine ecosystems and the vertical migration patterns of pelagic species. The team planned a deep penetration dive to 80 meters, using trimix breathing gas to prevent nitrogen narcosis. Equipment preparation began at dawn, with meticulous attention to gas mixing and decompression planning. Amanda carried twin 18-liter tanks containing 18% oxygen, 45% helium, and 37% nitrogen for the bottom portion of the dive. She also wore additional tanks with different gas mixtures for decompression stops during ascent. James monitored surface support equipment and maintained radio contact with the research vessel. Roberto briefed the team on local current patterns and marine life behavior. He mentioned that hammerhead sharks use the blue hole as a cleaning station where smaller fish remove parasites from their skin. The behavior typically occurred at depths between 30 and 60 meters. At 8:30 a.m., the team entered the water in calm conditions with unlimited surface visibility. Amanda activated her dive computer and began descent along the eastern wall of the blue hole. At 15 meters, the walls opened dramatically into the main chamber. Sunlight filtering from above created cathedral lighting effects on the limestone formations. The water remained crystal clear with visibility exceeding 60 meters in all directions. At 25 meters, Amanda encountered the first marine life. A school of Caribbean reef sharks, about 8 individuals, swam in loose formation near the wall. Their behavior appeared normal, showing mild curiosity before continuing their patrol pattern. James maintained position above Amanda, monitoring her descent rate and gas consumption. At 45 meters depth, the water temperature dropped to 24 degrees Celsius, and the lighting became more subdued. Amanda's depth gauge showed 50 meters when she first spotted the hammerheads. 3 great hammerheads, each over 12 feet long, emerged from the blue water beyond the wall. Their distinctive hammer-shaped heads swayed rhythmically as they swam. The sharks showed no immediate interest in the divers, maintaining their distance while following parallel courses. Amanda continued descending toward her target depth of 80 meters. At 65 meters, her dive computer indicated the beginning of significant nitrogen narcosis effects, despite the helium mixture. Technical divers called this depth range the martini effect, where each additional 10 meters felt like drinking another alcoholic beverage. Amanda's thinking became slightly impaired, but her training and experience helped maintain proper procedures. At 72 meters depth, she encountered something unprecedented. A school of over 20 great hammerheads occupied the deepest visible portion of the blue hole. The sharks ranged from 10 to 15 feet in length, with several massive females that appeared to be pregnant. Their behavior suggested a congregation related to mating or feeding activities. Amanda had never documented such a large gathering of hammerheads in a blue hole environment. She began taking photographs and water samples while maintaining neutral buoyancy, 10 meters above the shark school. The largest female, nearly 16 feet long, began showing interest in Amanda's equipment. The shark's approach triggered responses from other individuals in the school. Within minutes, 5 large hammerheads surrounded Amanda at her maximum depth. Their behavior remained curious rather than aggressive, but their size and proximity created an intimidating presence. Amanda's gas supply indicated she had reached her planned turnaround point. She began her ascent, but noticed her dive computer displaying error messages. The depth sensor had malfunctioned, showing inconsistent readings that made decompression calculations unreliable. Without accurate depth information, Amanda couldn't safely calculate her required decompression stops. The hammerheads followed her ascent, maintaining their interest in her equipment and movements. At what she estimated was 50 meters depth, Amanda attempted to signal James for assistance. The nitrogen narcosis effects, combined with equipment failure and the presence of multiple large large predators created a dangerous combination of stress factors. She made the critical decision to abort the research dive and begin immediate emergency ascent procedures. Using backup depth measurement techniques and conservative gas management, Amanda slowly ascended while the hammerhead school dispersed back into deeper water. She completed extended decompression stops at 20, 15, 10, and 5 meters before surfacing after 95 minutes underwater. Post-dive analysis revealed that her computer's pressure sensor had failed due to extreme depth exposure. The hammerhead congregation represented the largest gathering ever documented in a blue hole system, but the equipment failure prevented detailed scientific documentation of the encounter. Eagle's Nest, Florida. On March 15th, 2003, David Shaw and Tim Mitchell drove to Weeki Wachee Springs for what they thought would be an exciting weekend dive. David was 34 years old and had logged over 200 open water dives in the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. Tim was 29, a recreational diver with 50 logged dives, mostly in Florida's Clear Springs. Both men were confident swimmers and experienced with deep air diving to 130 feet. Eagle's Nest was known among Florida divers as one of the deepest freshwater sites in the United States. The limestone sinkhole dropped to over 300 feet. What attracted recreational divers was the easy entry, a large opening with crystal clear water and natural light filtering down to 50 feet. David had heard about the cave system extending horizontally from the main shaft. Tim was curious about the formations he'd seen in magazines. They arrived at 10 a.m. with standard recreational gear. Single aluminum tanks filled to 3,000 psi, basic regulators with no backup air source, 2 small diving lights each, no cave diving training. They had never heard of continuous guidelines or the rule of thirds for gas management. The descent began easily. At 30 feet, the opening was 40 feet across with excellent visibility. At 60 feet, they could still see the surface clearly. The cave entrance became visible at 80 feet, a dark opening that seemed to beckon them forward. David checked his pressure gauge. Still plenty of air. Tim gave an okay sign and pointed toward the cave mouth. They swam through the restriction at 90 feet. The passage was 8 feet wide and 12 feet high. Natural light from the main shaft still provided some illumination behind them. They turned on their lights and continued forward. The passage sloped downward gently. At 120 feet, they passed through another restriction. The walls closed into 6 feet wide. Behind them, natural light had faded to a dim glow. David felt nitrogen narcosis at 140 feet. His thinking became fuzzy, but he had experienced this on deep ocean dives. Tim followed close behind, fascinated by the cave formation. Neither man had established reference points or noted their route. At 180 feet, they reached a large chamber with multiple passages. David chose the passage that seemed to slope upward, thinking it would lead back toward the surface. The passage continued downward instead. At 200 feet, both men were significantly narked. David's air consumption had increased dramatically due to depth and early anxiety. Tim was breathing harder, working to keep up. They had been underwater for 18 minutes. David checked his gauge, the 1200 psi remaining. Time to head back. But which way was back? In the darkness beyond their lights, every passage looked identical. David made his best guess and led Tim into what he hoped was the return route. The passage narrowed to 4 feet wide. At 220 feet, with 800 psi remaining, David realized they were lost. Tim's gauge showed 600 psi. They had perhaps 8 minutes of air remaining at this depth. Panic breathing set in. David tried 3 different passages, each leading deeper or to dead ends. Tim followed, his movements becoming sluggish as carbon dioxide built up. At 260 feet, David's regulator began to breathe hard. Tim's air ran out first. David attempted to share air, but neither had trained for this emergency at depth while narked. Recovery divers found their bodies 5 days later at 280 feet depth in a passage running parallel to the correct exit route. They had been 50 feet from safety when their air ran out. The passage they needed was clearly marked with a permanent guideline that neither man had known to look for. On February 8, 2015, Sarah and Mike Thompson arrived at the Riviera Maya for their honeymoon diving trip. Sarah was 26 years old, a nurse from Denver, with advanced open water certification and 80 log dives. Mike was 30, a software engineer who had been diving for 5 years with 120 dives. They had completed 3 cenote dives earlier in the week, with certified guides. Local dive shops marketed it as suitable for advanced open water divers, emphasizing visual experience while downplaying technical cave diving skills required for safe penetration. They hired Carlos Mendez, a 35-year-old local guide who claimed 15 years of cenote diving experience. Carlos had advanced open water certification but had never completed formal cave diving training. He relied on familiarity with popular routes and his ability to memorize passage layouts. Carlos brought weighted markers instead of a continuous guideline, placing them at major junctions as reference points. This was common practice among undertrained cenote guides who didn't understand proper cave diving protocols. The group entered the water at 10:30 a.m. The cenote opening was spectacular. a perfectly circular pool 60 feet across, surrounded by jungle vegetation. Sunlight streamed through crystal clear water, illuminating limestone walls that dropped vertically to 40 feet, before opening into horizontal passages. Visibility was over 200 feet, making the underwater landscape appear deceptively simple and safe. They descended to the main passage entrance at 50 feet depth. Carlos placed his first marker and led them into the cave system. The passage was 15 feet wide and 12 feet high, decorated with massive stalactites and flowstone formations. Sarah swam beside Mike, both amazed by the cathedral-like beauty. At 200 feet from the entrance, they reached a major junction where 3 passages met. Carlos placed another marker and chose the right-hand passage. Carlos was confident in his navigation, but his memory was based on diving during dry season when water levels were lower. Recent rains had raised the water level by 8 feet, changing the visual references he used for navigation. The passage continued for another 300 feet, before reaching a large chamber decorated with delicate formations. They had been underwater for 22 minutes and were now 500 feet from the snowed entrance. Carlos led them toward what he believed was a shortcut back to the main passage. The route involved swimming through a restriction, then following a passage that curved back toward the entrance. However, the changed water level had altered the restriction's appearance. Carlos swam through an opening that looked familiar, but actually led to a different section of the cave system. After swimming for 15 minutes without seeing any markers, Carlos realized his navigation error. Sarah's pressure gauge read 1,000 psi. Mike had 1,200 psi remaining. The group split up to search for the correct exit route. Carlos swam toward what he thought was the main passage. Sarah and Mike stayed together, following a different passage that appeared to lead upward toward natural light. Sarah's air ran out first. Mike attempted to share air using his octopus regulator, but neither had practiced emergency air sharing in an overhead environment. The stress caused both divers to consume their remaining air rapidly. They were 150 feet from an exit passage, but without a continuous guideline, they had no way to navigate through the complex cave system. Carlos found his way back to the cenote entrance after 45 minutes underwater. Recovery teams found Sarah's body in a dead-end chamber, and Mike's body was discovered in a parallel passage 100 feet away. Shockingly, the investigation revealed that a continuous guideline would have led them to safety in less than 10 minutes, but the couple had died within 200 feet of 2 different exit routes. Kilsby Sinkhole, Australia. On November 3, 1989, Robert Chen arrived in Mount Gambier during a business trip to evaluate limestone quarrying operations for his Hong Kong engineering firm. Robert was 31 years old, a structural engineer with a methodical problem-solving approach and confidence in his technical abilities. He was an accomplished swimmer who had recently completed open water diving certification in Hong Kong's clear waters. Kilsby Sinkhole was carved from limestone by underground water flow over thousands of years. The site consisted of a perfectly circular opening 25 feet across, dropping vertically 200 feet to a series of horizontal passages. The main shaft was filled with crystal clear water, maintaining constant visibility and temperature. What made Kilsby dangerous was not the vertical descent, but the complex maze of passages extending horizontally from the bottom. Robert contacted a local dive shop and arranged equipment rental. The shop provided basic recreational gear. Single aluminum tank filled to 3,000 psi, standard regulator system, basic buoyancy compensator, and 2 small diving lights. When asked about cave diving certification, Robert explained he was an experienced engineer and confident swimmer who had researched the site thoroughly. The employee provided equipment without further safety questions. Robert's engineering background taught him to analyze complex systems methodically. He studied maps of Kilsby Sinkhole and read technical descriptions of the cave layout. On paper, the system seemed logical, a main vertical shaft with horizontal passages extending in 4 primary directions. Robert calculated air consumption rates, estimated swimming speeds, and planned a conservative dive profile. His engineering analysis couldn't account for 3-dimensional complexity of underwater navigation in zero visibility conditions. He arrived at 2 p.m. on a clear afternoon. The site was deserted, which Robert preferred for solo exploration. The descent began smoothly. At 50 feet, the circular opening above still provided adequate natural light. At 100 feet, he switched on his primary diving light. The limestone walls were smooth and featureless, carved into perfect cylindrical shape. Robert reached the bottom at 200 feet depth. 4 passages extended horizontally from the central chamber, each approximately 10 feet wide and 12 feet high. According to his research, the passages connected in a rough rectangular pattern. Robert chose the north passage and began horizontal exploration. His plan was to swim 200 feet into the passage, then return and explore the next passage clockwise. The north passage extended straight for 150 feet before making a 90-degree turn right. Robert followed the turn and continued swimming. The passage began to branch into smaller tributaries not shown on his cave map. Robert chose what appeared to be the main passage and continued forward. At 18 minutes into the dive, he realized he was lost. The passage had narrowed to 6 feet wide and showed no signs of opening into the main east passage. His pressure gauge read 1600 psi, indicating he had consumed 1/3 of his air supply. Following proper protocols, this was his turnaround point, but turning around meant admitting navigation failure. Robert decided to continue forward, believing the passage would eventually connect with a familiar area. At 1200 psi remaining, Robert's primary light failed. The bulb had been damaged during rental and finally burned out. Robert switched to his backup light, a small pen light designed for emergency use only. The weak beam provided just enough illumination to see passage walls immediately around him. Navigation became nearly impossible in the dim light. Robert attempted to retrace his route using limestone walls as reference points. In inadequate lighting, every section appeared identical. His air consumption rate had doubled from anxiety and exertion. The backup light began to dim as its battery drained. Robert found himself swimming in near-total darkness, feeling along cave walls with his hands. At 900 psi remaining, he made a final navigation error, swimming into a passage that led to a large chamber 400 feet from the entrance. In complete darkness, he felt frantically along the chamber walls, searching for any opening that might lead toward the surface. Recovery teams found Robert's body the following day in the dead-end chamber, his tank completely empty. The correct exit passage was located just 30 feet from where he died, clearly marked with a permanent guideline he had never been trained to recognize. Blue Springs State Park, October 14, 2018. James Morton was a 42-year-old commercial airline pilot from Atlanta with over 300 log dives. James believed his experience with deep ocean diving and professional pilot training would translate to underground environments. The entrance to Blue Springs Cave system was protected by multiple warning signs. The largest, positioned directly at the cave mouth, displayed a white skeleton against black background with red lettering. "Stop, prevent your death. Cave diving requires special training and equipment." James entered the water at 3 p.m. with standard recreational gear. Single aluminum tank, basic regulator, 2 small lights. The cave entrance was deceptively welcoming, a large opening 20 feet wide with excellent visibility extending deep into the passage. Natural light penetrated 80 feet into the cave, creating the illusion of a safe environment. James swam past the warning signs and entered the cave system. At 120 feet from the entrance, he reached a restriction, where the passage narrowed to 8 feet wide. Beyond the restriction, the passage opened into a large chamber with multiple exits. The passage he chose curved left after 200 feet, then branched into 3 smaller passages. James had been underwater for 15 minutes and was now 350 feet from the cave entrance. The passage he explored narrowed progressively until he was swimming through a restriction barely wider than his shoulders. When James attempted to turn around, he discovered the restriction was easier to navigate in one direction. Panic set in as he realized he was trapped. His air consumption doubled as anxiety took over. At 1200 psi remaining, James finally extracted himself from the restriction but had become completely disoriented. He spent the remaining 20 minutes of his air supply searching for the correct exit route. Recovery divers found his body the following day, 50 feet from a clearly marked guideline that would have led him directly to the exit. Ginny Springs, June 22, 2019. Lisa and David Park, a married couple from Ohio, were completing their final day of a Florida diving vacation. Both had advanced open water certifications and 150 log dives each. They climbed over a locked gate at 4 p.m., reasoning they would only enter far enough to take photos. The Ginny Springs Cave system began with a large well-lit entrance extending 100 feet, before branching into multiple passages. After 25 minutes underwater, they found themselves in a complex maze of intersecting passages. David's pressure gauge showed 1100 psi, Lisa's showed 900 psi. They had violated the rule of thirds for gas management. Every passage they tried led to dead ends or deeper into the cave system. David's air ran out first. Lisa continued searching alone, her remaining air lasting another 8 minutes. Recovery teams found both bodies in a dead-end passage 300 feet from the nearest exit route. Peacock Springs, March 15, 2020. Michael Rodriguez, a 29-year-old local dive instructor, decided to explore beyond his training limits. Michael had taught open water diving for 3 years, but always stayed within the natural light zone. On his day off, he decided to penetrate deeper into the cave system than ever before. At 250 feet from the entrance, Michael encountered a silt-out caused by his fin kicks, disturbing accumulated sediment. Visibility dropped to 0 instantly. Michael had never experienced a complete silt-out in an enclosed space. He became disoriented in the murky water, unable to distinguish between familiar passages and unfamiliar areas. Michael's body was recovered by fellow instructors who organized the search. He was found 180 feet from the cave entrance, in a side passage he had swum past safely hundreds of times. His tank showed 800 psi remaining, indicating he had died from drowning after removing his regulator in panic. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission found that every death could have been prevented by following basic cave diving protocols, proper training, continuous guidelines, adequate gas supplies, and buddy procedures. The warning signs these divers ignored contained the exact information that would have saved their lives. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.